On October 1, 1960, when Nigeria obtained its independence from the colonial masters, expectations were high for a country blessed with so much human and mineral resources. However rich the country is perceived or presumed to be, judging by its people and their diverse culture, the journey has not been one paved with gold. Rather, it's been a harvest of challenged leadership, policies poorly formulated and selfishly implemented. 61 years after the Declaration of Independence, it would appear every tribe, tongue is drifting in different direction.
This is the first time in the history of Nigeria that we have had an uninterrupted 20 plus years of leadership. And 20 years is not enough to bring us together. Perhaps after a southerner has done it, Obasanjo for 2 terms, a northerner has done it. In between them, a southerner and a northerner have ruled, you know. So perhaps when we go the cycle, maybe, just maybe, we'll begin to see that cohesion. And we need to have leaders who don't see themselves as a Hausa man, a Yoruba man, an Igbo man. You have to first see yourself as a Nigerian, regardless of where you come from. You know, even in our states, we have these problems nowadays. You know, an indigene, a settler, and what have you. These are all political issues. People want to use it so that they can edge some people out of the system.
By the end of the country's civil war from 6 July 1967 to 15 January 1970, described as one of the most brutal in history, considering the number of casualties, and 16 years of military rulership that truncated the country's early democratic experience, Nigeria's economy had taken a great hit. International relations hampered, foreign aid affected, and business owners who were at the mercies of the cronies of the ruling junta barely survived. However, by 1999, when the country returned to civil rule with the election of Chief Olusegun Obasanjo as president, citizens' expectations were high, and this had set the tone for a much anticipated economic recovery process. He rolled on the goodwill of Chief MK Abiola, the winner of the annual June 12, 1993 election, who later died while in prison after seeking to reclaim his mandate. The Obasanjo administration will have to correct the ills of years of poor economic planning, policies and implementation, which were largely the hallmark of military dictatorship. And to lead the economic recovery drive is the oil sector, the country's major revenue earner.
This administration must deal with the following issues, even in these difficult times of near economic collapse.
Shortly after civilian government comes, oil prices go into the stratosphere. That killed us, instead of being in our favor. You know, the Nigerian economy has been referred to as a recursive economy. 2 steps forwards, 4 steps backwards, and that's how we've traveled. Now, naturally, the spike in oil prices should have been an advantage, of course. We should have captured the savings, invested massively in infrastructure, and in a number of things. But the character of the civilian government did not enable us to do what we could have done.
There were, however, much more fundamental problems with reliance on oil as opposed to industrialization or diversification to contend with.
If you look across all of Africa, all the countries that have failed to achieve sustained living standards, and as you mentioned earlier, poverty, are those countries that did not industrialize their economies because they relied on minerals. The second point about mineral dependence is that it induces volatility, it induces a lack of planning, But more importantly, it generates the kind of institutions that breed corruption. People get so entrenched into this kind of institution of sharing rather than baking the cake.
With a strong economic team and the establishment of various anti-graft agencies including the EFCC and ICPC in an attempt to tackle corruption, the Obasanjo's administration made some measure of progress in stabilizing the country's polity. By 2007, when the administration came to an end, Nigeria's sustained fiscal prudence resulted in 2005 landmark accord with official Paris Club creditors, making a payment of $12.4 billion in exchange for an $18.6 billion debt forgiveness, the highest debt relief ever in sub-Saharan Africa's history. Nigeria also became the first African sovereign country to clear most of its loans to the London Club of Commercial Creditors.
If we had taken all the monies we earned during that period, instead of using them to pay off these debts, turned using nipple stamps, we would have had plenty of capital available to invest in infrastructure and all kinds of things, while those debts will pay themselves over time. But he was desperately trying to, this funny debt, and was get rid of it. In some ways, it was a good thing, but we could have gotten a better deal.
Despite this long list of achievements by the Obasanjo's administration, including the creation of the Niger Delta Development Commission to attend to issues of development in that region, the insecurity posed by the Niger Delta militants could not be resolved. Since the country's return to democracy, there has been 4 presidents, 2 from the south and 2 from the north. After Chief Olusegun Obasanjo completed his tenure of office, Umar Musa Yar'Adua, noted for being a stickler for the rule of law, assumed office. His emergence put paid to the challenges of Niger Delta militancy, for which he created the Niger Delta Ministry and Amnesty Program. He ensured the reduction of petrol pump price from 75 to 65 naira, emphasized public accountability by publicly declaring his assets, and also implemented the 18,000 naira minimum wage for workers. He also drew attention to the country's judicial and electoral system after he acknowledged that he was a product of a flawed political process. However, the judiciary appears still blindfolded and totally dependent on the executive.
Let me go back on the relationship between the executive and the judiciary. That's key. And I'll tell a story to be able to demonstrate this point. Justice Obaseki, who's my dad's second cousin, tells this story that once they were sitting, he was sitting with Sir Justice Danley Alexander. That's from 1975 to 1979. And Sir Alexander got a note from the then head of state that he wanted to see him. And on the same notes behind it, Justice Obaseki tells the story. He wrote, "I am the head of the judiciary. You are the head of the executive. I am sorry, I cannot see you while I'm sitting." Now, just ask yourself today whether any Chief Justice of Nigeria will be able to respond to the president, or a Chief Judge will be able to respond like that to the states. Now, there are many reasons beyond the fact of the strength of character. The way in which the judiciary is funded is also a problem. So we've made some progress, but I don't think we've met the expectation of the consumers in any way. As a senior advocate of Nigeria, I am embarrassed that a commercial case will take 3, 4, 5 years. I'm embarrassed that in the Supreme Court, sometimes the decisions that are delivered fail to recognize that that's a policy court. And I'll give you an example. So you have a situation today where a case travels all the way to the Supreme Court, 20 years perhaps. At the Supreme Court level, it is raised that the counsel who signed did not sign properly, even though he's on the roll, either because at the time he signed with a stamp or he signed incorrectly. And the case is lost on account of that fact, which has nothing to do with the parties. And we've been attempting to turn that around. It still remains the same.
There seems to be a need for some fundamental reforms.
When I started to practice in Lagos, I'd go to the court on a Monday morning and there'd be 150 cases waiting for a high court judge, superior court of record. Some of us were so desperate to practice and were so desperate to get our day in court, we'll go and meet the registrar and plead for our cases to be called out of 10. When my bosses then, Shofunde Ogunigbe, Belgorian Osakwe, when they found I was so passionate and desperate, they started sending me out of jurisdiction. And then a gentleman came as Attorney General, now the Vice President of the country, and introduced fundamental reforms. And we'll continue to talk about that. And one of the things he did was to reduce that cost list substantially. Now, that took a lot of intervention in soft and hard infrastructure. But you first have to have the intellect to be able to do that. So the question is, those who are occupying sensitive positions in the administration of justice, do they have what it takes?
The unexpected death of Umar Musa Yar'Adua on May 5th, 2010, paved the way for Goodluck Jonathan's administration. One thrust of this government was economic recovery through diversification. This resulted in various agricultural reforms under the supervision of the then Minister of Agriculture Akinwumi Adesina, who is the current president of the African Development Bank. Goodluck Jonathan's agricultural transformation agenda helped the country cover a lot of ground in its quest for self-sufficiency in food production. This remains a clear path the country must follow to drive growth.
Even there are smaller countries that are, Vietnam today, for example, has become a global force. They export close to $9 billion of shrimps to America. So they diversified even the agricultural sector by horizontal diversification. We didn't do that. So this is really, so that's why every year we budget $30 billion, whatever it is. You see a country like Brazil with the same population as ours, budgeting $600–700 billion.
We had situation in the 60s and 70s where Nigeria's plans for 5 years, five-year development plan with targeted measures or what I would call key performance indicators, economically speaking, that the governments aspire to hit. Now, right now, we don't have that, and we don't seem to have that continuity of a single government or a single party running. There is a blueprint during elections, but apparently after somebody wins the election, they tend to throw it away. And it basically means that the political class have realized that they're not accountable.
A number of literacy programs were mooted to address the yawning educational gap, especially in the northern part of the country, one of which was targeted at educating the Amajirais. While the education sector continues to command a level of attention from government, educationists believe much more is left undone.
In terms of quantity, we have done some improvement, even the number of the universities that have been required in the country, even this 200, going by the UNESCO estimates, even the 200 are not enough to cover for a population of 200 million. There are people there are countries that are less in population than Nigeria, probably half of the population of Nigeria, but some of them have 500 universities, 600 universities and the rest.
Relatively, we have seen some increase in the funding that is accruing to the sector, even though it's not commensurate with the UNESCO standard. But there has been increase. So there are significant progresses that have been made, but like I said, it's not commensurate with the resources that is in the country, and it's not also satisfying the earnings and the needs of Nigerians. That means a lot more needs to be done in terms of addressing such developmental challenges in the years ahead.
It was during his tenure that the nation's power sector witnessed the unbundling of the Power Holding Company of Nigeria to foster efficiency and effectiveness in power generation, transmission, and distribution. Attaining that height still seems like a mirage, judging by the numerous complaints of consumers on billings, inadequate power supply, and lack of prepaid meters, among others. However, the growing menace of the Islamic sect Boko Haram, which ideology negates Western education, took a turn for the worse, with the abduction of students in various parts of the Northeast, including Chibok and Dapchi.
They went into the secondary school, the Chibok girls, and they took them off. And as we speak, the lucky ones who have even come back, they are coming back with children of terrorists, which is very, very sad.
They wreaked havoc on communities, killing, maiming with reckless abandon, and even hoisted their flags in several localities in a bid to assert their dominance and growing confidence.
Born in December 1942 in Daura.
Little wonder it was a much-needed relief in some quarters when a one-time general of the Nigerian army, Muhammadu Buhari, became president in 2015, riding on the mantra of change. The core components of his campaign were security, corruption, and the economy.
President Muhammadu Buhari's military career started at the then Nigerian Military Training College, NMTC Kaduna, in 1962.
Insecurity has continued to spread, with banditry, kidnapping, farmer herders clash taking center stage. The criminal elements seem to have stayed ahead of our security agencies for a long time, regardless of the recent change in the country's security architecture. While some successes have been made with substantial funds provided for the purchase of military hardware and training of personnel, much more is still required to win back the confidence of Nigerians.
We must protect our military. Protect them by providing for them. Not only providing for them, we must ensure the system. They must put system in place to ensure that those troops, those soldiers really get what they are entitled to, so that their loyalty remains first to this nation. The NDA that we know is a premier military institution with high standard of discipline. But by the time you find a situation whereby people, maybe because you know somebody, being put in there without necessarily qualifying with a standard that is expected, then there's a problem. There's a problem. So, we must try as much as possible to insulate them from unnecessary politics.
Since inception, President Muhammadu Buhari's administration has taken infrastructure development as a major policy thrust, with an approval in 2020 for the establishment of Infraco PLC, an infrastructure development vehicle wholly focused on Nigeria, with combined debt and equity take-off capital of 15 trillion naira. Establishment in 2020 of the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund with more than $1 billion in funding so far, and an additional inflow of $2 billion from the government for the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, and the launch of the Nigeria Innovation Fund. Aside from completing some of the rail projects such as the Abuja-Kaduna rail line started by its predecessors, the 156-kilometer Lagos-Ibadan standard gauge rail, the 327-kilometer Itakwe-Warri standard gauge rail, completed and commissioned 33 years after construction began, ongoing Kaduna-Maradi standard gauge rail, revamping of the Port Harcourt-Maiduguri narrow gauge rail, and much more are testaments of what the government is working on. On roads, the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund is investing over $1 billion in 3 flagship projects: Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, Second Niger Bridge, Abuja-Kaduna-Zaria-Kano Expressway, the development of key roads and bridges like Bodo Boni in Rivers and Apapa Oshodi Oworonshoki Ojota in Lagos. Approval for new private sector funded deep sea ports in Lekki, Bonny and Ibom. According to the World's Poverty Clock, over 105 million Nigerians live in extreme poverty, with an average population growth rate of 2.6%. While the various administrations since 1999 have consistently ensured budgetary allocation for the education sector, it is still widely viewed as grossly underfunded, especially at the tertiary levels, despite the role played by TET Fund. The result is incessant strike by teaching and non-teaching staff of the universities. This unfortunately also applies to the health sector, regardless of the successes recorded against the Ebola virus and the challenges posed by COVID-19.
In every state now, you have state teaching hospitals. This is not what we had before. Before, in general hospital, medical centers, you have teaching hospital in every place. These teaching hospitals are training medical students, are training resident doctors, so they have the capacity to train. But where is the capacity to retain? So are you just training for others to enjoy the fruit of your labor? Where is the capacity to retain? There's none.
Over 8,700 Nigerian doctors currently work in the UK, with a lot more getting licensed periodically to practice their trade. This is a drain on the health sector, as many more may join their counterparts abroad in the face of the seeming inability of the government to tackle the issue of funding. Since the advent of telecommunications in Nigeria in 2001, mobile connections have risen to 187.9 million mobile users as of January 2021, an equivalent of 90% of the country's population. This is an increase of 17 million users from January 2020. Statistics also show that there are 104.4 million internet users in Nigeria as of January 2021, with an internet penetration of over 40%. There are 33 million social media users in Nigeria. Most of these are youth who have found the digital space a safe haven from all the political, ethno-religious, economic and insecurity tensions, as well as the rising unemployment level that has bedecked Nigeria. The huge potential the space provides has not gone unnoticed for a lot of Nigerian youth who are maximizing the opportunities to be financially independent and globally competitive. While several applications built by Nigerians are getting international recognition, there is still much more to achieve in using technology to drive growth.
Getting the e-government pilot is a must for Nigeria, because really government seems to be the biggest spender, and the biggest spender in terms of getting new technology adopted will mean more employment for the increased youth population that we have. And then the second thing is around security. The security was defined by the National Identity Number, the NIN, which in previous governments they've tried. I mean, it started right back from Obasanjo, if you wouldn't believe that, trying to get a unique identity for a Nigerian citizen. So you have to give the government right now kudos that they've picked up something that was always politically charged and somewhat difficult to implement. Though they've achieved another 30 million or thereabouts on top of the database that they acquired, we've not seen the true impact of the NIN to abate the security aspects. And I think that personally there's a great opportunity for the current government to utilize technology in a manner that you have the security agencies, the intelligence and the defense working in unison, as opposed to the silos that they currently have right now.
To harness these benefits, the government must demonstrate a clear understanding of the huge potential the space offers, and also show willingness in providing supportive infrastructure and deploying same in addressing security, financial, economic and electoral matters.
There is a challenge. The challenge is that you need to get a level of skill for you to deploy the digital platform, right? and which is still not like a challenge, because people can be trained, and you can be trained over a week, a day, short period, and every person will just get into it, get in tune into it, and will start using the digital space. It will surprise you to know that the three most richest countries today in the world, or company in the world, are running digital platforms. And let me tell you the truth, it's even more cheaper to start a digital platform than starting up your business physically, because you don't need to pay for office. I started my digital platform from my room, one room, in my father's house.
While so many young Nigerians are driving on the digital highway, making great success locally and globally, their lack of interest in politics may be connected to the perceived lack of transparency in the country's electoral system. The argument to reform the process remains on the front burner, with legislators arguing for and against. However, with 187 million mobile telephone subscriptions, which is about 90% of the total population, the country appears ripe for electronic voting.
And we have a wide coverage of 2G in the country, so 2G plus 3G should be the way to go, not just 3G, but 2G. That gives a strong, I would say, a strong probability that electronic voting will work if you base it on both technologies, as opposed to waiting for, I would say, the perfect scenario.
In 1980, the Naira was quite competitive against other currencies, exchanging at 55 kobo to a dollar, rose to 92 Naira by 1999, and today it's over 550 Naira. The country's GDP was 64.2 billion Naira in 1980, with a population of 73.4 million same year. GDP per capita was $874 and a growth rate of 4.2%. By 1999, GDP had declined to $59.37 billion, per capita was $498 and a 0.58% growth rate. As of 2014, when the country recorded its highest GDP of $546.68 billion, population was 176.64 million. Per capita GDP was $3,099 at a 6% growth rate. However, by 2020, with a population of 206.1 million people, GDP was $432.29 billion. Per capita GDP was $2,074 and a growth rate of minus 1.79%. While in the 80s, the country built a considerable amount of infrastructure, steel and glass plants, several vehicle assembly plants, we were a long way from that in 1999 and are yet to recover lost ground till date. For 22 years, Nigeria's democratic experience could be likened to attempting to do things the same way over and over again and expecting different outcomes. From being a middle-class income economy in the 80s when poverty rate was barely 27%, to being referred to as the poverty capital of the world with over 108 million people said to be living in extreme poverty amid unbelievable human capital and natural resources, should be a cause for concern for the political class and everyone who's been saddled with the responsibility of leading this nation. The sleeping giant must awake, otherwise the labor of our heroes past might just be in vain.